Welcome back to the second part of the Mick Burke Award competition. It is a contest for amateur filmmakers and explorers. 6 expeditions were chosen from the hundreds that applied, and those 6 teams were given basic amateur filmmaking equipment. We'll be discussing the film equipment a little later on. Now, roaming the world is difficult enough. Having to film it as well would, for many, be an intolerable burden. This award is in memory of a man who thrived on such a challenge, Mick Burke. He was a climber who died as he made for the summit of Everest in 1975. He was also a fine BBC cameraman. That's why he was climbing Everest in the first place. And so it is as a tribute to an adventurer and a photographer that this award is made jointly by the BBC and the Royal Geographical Society. The competition, which is for this trophy, the Mick Burke Award, is judged solely on the quality of the films the teams produce. Now, if you were with us last night, you'll find it difficult to believe, as I did, that these really are amateur films. Some of the teams had no previous filmmaking experience. Before they set off, they had a 3-day course covering basic filmmaking principles, and when they returned, they had the services of a world-about-us film editor who put his wealth of experience into turning miles and miles of film into the polished results we shall see tonight. Claire Francis chairs our panel of judges, who are television journalist and writer Julian Pettifer, Dr. Marjorie Sweeting, who is an explorer specialising in cave exploring and potholing, and a professional filmmaker, a producer with the world about us, Richard Taylor. Now, we've already seen films made in West Africa, Ecuador and northern Kenya. The 4th film in our competition is of a climbing expedition in Greenland's Staunings Alps, and it was made by members of the Mountaineering Club at Salford University in Greater Manchester. Alan Watson was the cameraman. He's an experienced climber, but a first-time cinematographer. The leader and sound recordist was Jerry McCulloch. It's his first time as a sound man, but his teammates describe him as an ace climber.
Okay, chaps, I think it's about time to go for the pub. Right, you bad? You like it? We decided to go for Greenland because it was a remote area. The expertise in the climbing club at that time was sufficient that we could mount an expedition to somewhere such as Greenland. The mountains in Greenland are an awful lot smaller than the Himalayas, certainly, but their remoteness makes increases the challenge of them.
There was a lot of winter snow left. Travel was very difficult, very, very soft, up to your knees and beyond in snow for quite a bit of the time. But as the time went on, the winter snows finally thawed, roughly about the beginning of August, and travel over the glacier was much easier.
One thing about being out in the Arctic Circle in the middle of the summer is that you get 24 hours daylight, and this was a great help because often when you go out to do a climb, you have to sort of time yourself to make sure you don't get stuck out in the dark.
It was so cold that in the morning we'd have to sort of put the batteries under our jumpers and warm them up so there was enough power, to power the camera.
It's very hard in that sort of situation to keep yourself motivated. And when you're actually there sitting in the tent and it's warm in your sleeping bag and it's howling blizzard outside, the only thing you want to do is read Cade and Abel or something, and you've got 300 pages left, you think, great. And sort of the biggest decision of the day was whether you had sort of a herbal tea or a normal tea.
You could buy things with your food. The most valuable thing was peanut yorkie, which you could buy 4 tea bags with. The least valuable thing was a herbal tea bag, which you could buy absolutely nothing with. Throw them away. The face was very interesting for filming and climbing, and it can be very frightening at times. But somehow looking through the camera takes away a lot of the fear. It's like watching it on television. It's not as though you're there. It's not real. Whereas it was for feet and feet.
We were carrying up the gear while Alan was getting his camera positions. And just simple things like handing in the filters, and he'd ask you for a coloured filter and you had to be so careful that you didn't drop your filter. All sorts of problems like that compounded by the position that we were in.
Rather than actually climbing mountains, we seemed to be there to make a film. And this did lead to some very heated disputes, in actual fact. However, in retrospect, I'm glad that we did make the film, because we do now have a permanent record.
The party travelled by boat to Iceland, and from there flew to Mestersvig on the northeast Greenland coast.
Our objective, the Staunings Alps in northeast Greenland, and the previously unclimbed south face of the Dunattor. Mestersvig, the gateway to the Staunings, is a small airfield and radio station with a staff of about 11. In the summer, helicopters provide the best means of transport. Using the helicopter saved weeks of tedious load carrying. The flight was ace. Our base was set up among the boulders at the side of the glacier.
Blue sky.
We found a food dump left by a previous Italian expedition, and 20-year-old soup and pasta provided a relatively good meal. At other times, the view from the dining room helped take our minds off the less exciting dried food.
Once you get going, it's okay.
Steel crampons strapped onto the boots were essential from now on. It was so cold that our fingers stuck to the buckles.
Spraying on the rock.
From the base camp, we could see the ice fall, the first barrier. To reach Dunattor, we had to find a route through the constantly changing icefall. Heavy rucksacks full of equipment and food for a week, added to the soft snow, made glacier travel painfully slow. On the other side of the valley, we could see Glamis, which we were later to climb. Using 2 ice axes and with crampons on our feet, we climbed the steep ice barring our way to Dunattor.
Okay, I'm safe.
Oh yeah, right down in that. What's that?
Through the icefall at last, and we were on to the upper glacier. The long plod through soft snow gave us our first views of Dunattor. Snow-covered rock made the initial slopes quite tricky. This was followed by a long snow and ice gully. At the top, we found a good bivouac below some overhanging rock. That just looks great. Truly, a room with a view, and our base for the climbing on the rock face above. We have the bathroom over there. At base camp, the expedition leader, Jerry, waited for news of the birth of his first child.
This was the most nerve-wracking bit for me. No news, and I was running out of cigarettes.
Above the bivouac site, the climbing became increasingly difficult. One of us would lead a pitch and fix a rope. The second man would follow up the rope using mechanical devices called cloggers. Holds were becoming much smaller, and I was not too proud to use a piton that Kieran had placed. The crack line directly above us closed up. The good news was I could see another crack line out on the left. The bad news was, to reach it, I had to traverse a smooth rock wall. The only solution was to swing across. Just as I did, one of the two ropes came out and I dropped a few feet. Had the other come out, it would have been 300 feet. It was a nasty moment. I had to stop and think for a bit. But the other rope had held well, so I continued. We climbed 3 more pitches, but the weather was closing in rapidly. We decided to go down. Down at base camp, there was still no news from England. It's a relief when the decision to retreat is made and voiced. The tension of the climb was broken. Pulling the ropes down for the final time, we set off on the 14-hour trudge back to base camp. We arrived at the camp at 3 o'clock in the morning and crawled straight into our sleeping bags. Oh. Ooh, a deadly brew. That's as good a climbing as I've ever done in the mountains. But
That was quite a reasonable standard. I found it quite difficult with my big boots on. I think it would have been a lot easier with EBs.
oh, I think so, yeah. The thing about that thing is I found it hard enough in EBs, and It's all right in the Alps when you know the grade of something, but when you're on new territory, I just didn't realise how much effort it took. Although we did not reach the summit on this attempt, 4 days later, Alan and Pete made a successful first ascent of the south face of the Dunattor. By now we were relaxed, but for Jerry, the tension continued.
To answer the phone, Chris is well for the weekend. Conditions are currently away by down here for Monday, at 6:30 in British. There's a little girl, 8 pounds and 5 ounces. There's a little girl, 8 pounds and 5 ounces. And I hope to see you the next.
When your bottle goes, you just want to get out, don't you? And you just clear off.
Yeah.
Had enough. Let's go home. I want to see my mum.
We thought that there were really some super sequences there, and you'd gone to a great deal of trouble to set them up, and it must have made the rest of the team absolutely wild. Did it?
Yes.
But obviously it was worth the trouble because it really told, and I think that visually it was absolutely wonderful. The only thing was I thought that you assumed rather a lot of technical knowledge on the part of the viewer. I mean, certainly I wouldn't have known who Kieran was. You referred to a peaton that he'd left in the face.
I must say about that, there is that was intended to come slightly earlier. Whenever
yes, but even so, I don't think we would have known who
whenever
was Kieran.
we were doing the editing, we actually intended that should come together with the sequence that was supposed to. It seemed to, for some reason.
But I don't think that's the point. I think that it was just that you used terminology that we couldn't possibly have understood.
Kieran's one of our group. He's
oh, I see.
I
thought he was a previous climber who hadn't made it, maybe.
No.
Oh, I see.
What was, you see, normally when you're climbing, you don't try and sort of go up and go down. But obviously, to get the camera positions, not just Pete and myself climbed it. There was everybody had to go to fix the ropes so that we could then get the camera positions.
I
so
see,
Kieran had left it. I was trying
Yes.
to climb it without using it, but I couldn't. So I
But then
pulled
you
on it.
referred to EBs, and I
Yeah,
don't think I'd ever
yes.
know what EBs were.
Well, the EBs are a special kind of climbing boot, like a baseball boot, which makes climbing on very steep rock easier, rather than a cumbersome boot, which you'd walk on the snow.
It might have been nice if perhaps you'd said that very briefly in the commentary so we could have understood. Marjorie, what?
Again, I think with Claire that you did assume a certain mountaineering knowledge with your audience. One of the things that I would have liked, I think, would have been a little more about the geology and the rocks of the area, because you will keep talking about the different cracks and things, and anyone who's been on mountains knows that some rock is easier to climb than others, and perhaps something on that line would have been helpful.
Our main interest there was that the rock was loose and kept falling on us. And I'm afraid it didn't stretch very much further than that.
You had no... Did you have a geologist in your party?
It was all granite.
Oh, granite, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Richard, what did you feel?
I sometimes think that mountaineers, like some polar explorers, shouldn't be allowed to do their own commentaries, because there seems to be this terrible convention that everything has to be underplayed and understated. There's such a fear of shooting a line. And I felt that very much with this commentary. On the other hand, I must congratulate the cameraman. I thought the camera work was absolutely superb, and especially taking into account the hard physical conditions under which he must have worked. And I presume also a fairly stroppy team of actors at certain times.
A very understanding team of actors.
I would have loved more emotion, I must say. I mean, I realised you couldn't film the actual successful ascent, but it would have been nice to know how you felt about it when you did finally make the ascent.
Really? It didn't come out of the tent. They were asleep for 3 days.
I'd like them to have made more use of that splendid range of regional voices that you've got there. That would have been nice.
So generally we felt that visually it was absolutely wonderful, and that all the trouble you went to was well worthwhile, but we felt that perhaps the commentary could have been a little bit more relaxed and emotional even, and that perhaps you assumed a little bit more knowledge than we actually had, but an absolutely wonderful effort. Thank you.
Right, it might be interesting at this stage to pause and have a look at some of the equipment that these various expeditions were given. Now, one of our judges, Richard Taylor, is now a professional filmmaker, but started out with equipment not unlike this, Richard.
Pretty much the same, because the technology has advanced a lot since that time, of course, but fundamentally it's the same, yes.
What I find impressive about it is it's all very lightweight and all very manageable.
Well, I think the two main characteristics of this are that it's designed, obviously, for an expedition. And the first thing one must say is that it's immensely compact. You see, everything is put into this one box, except the tripod and the stock. The second thing is that it's very adaptable, interchangeable. You've got here the sound camera, and then in addition to that, if you want to get double coverage, or if it breaks down, you've got the silent camera, and at the same time you've got a separate tape recorder, two microphones, an omnidirectional, unidirectional one, two battery chargers, that's handy, one that works off the mains, and the other one that works off, this one, it works off a car battery. I've never seen it myself before, but this you just plug into a 12-volt.
Do you think it's important to have two cameras?
Well, it's obviously useful. Quite simply, on an expedition, you can't go off down to the local camera shop and get it repaired. So that obviously is important.
Now, I think what's impressive is the quality of the pictures we're seeing. Presumably 8mm film has advanced quite a lot in even the last 10 years.
Yes, I think one must be clear here that there is a difference between what the amateur using this equipment would normally have and the teams that went out on this expedition. Because, quite simply, what happened when they came back is that they had complete professional treatment. I mean, not just the excellent handling by John Nash, the editor, but a whole professional backup, and that makes a lot of difference. The 8mm film, for instance, is never, in fact, put through a projector. It goes straight onto video, and then the film is edited on 16mm and so on. That
of course,
makes a difference.
I mean, the point you made there is worth remembering, that films aren't only just made in cameras, they're made in cutting rooms as well.
Indeed.
Anyone who's thinking of going on an expedition and wants to make a film of it should not be put off by the fact that they don't have the sort of 16mm professional equipment that you use, should they?
Well, this is very much the top of the market in the amateur area, undoubtedly. But no, I think these films show what can be done.
Thank you very much, Richard.